Welcome back, friends. Today we're going to take a look at a full board of 55 picks in about 10 different shapes with 8 different guitar brands. Now these are all printed picks, ink print. An interesting thing you may notice if you've been following the videos is how less diverse the tortoise celluloid style is now during this period. We're looking at picks predominantly from the 1960s. However, if you go back to the mid-50s and into the mid-70s as well, and hopefully I'll remember to point those out. A few big names here: Rickenbacker, Gretsch guitars. Most people that have some vague familiarity with guitars know those names, but a few other lesser brands here, such as Goya, Custom Kraft, Ibanez Rickenbacker, and Arita. Now, Ibanez is a more well-known brand, Japanese-made. But let's go up here and start to review some of these, starting with our Rickenbackers. The Rickenbacker 4 picks shown here contain at least 2 that go back to the 1950s or early 60s. This one, undoubtedly the oldest one on the board, featured in this Coke on Ice variation here. And as we talked about, the Coke on Ice variation is a type of celluloid that has the same appearance as a glass filled with Coca-Cola that has ice in it. And that's surely what it looks like. The Coke on Ice goes back to the 1940s and into the 60s. It's seen. And that's an older pick. Very difficult to come by right there. Here we have a variation on that as well. We have the Slow Gin on Ice variation. Again, about circa 1960, plus or minus a few years. And a few of the picks on less distinct celluloids right here all have the same Rickenbacker logo. Moving over here to the Gretsch group now. Gretsch, their front runner for the pick shape they chose was the D'Andrea 348. And by the way, all these picks are D'Andrea made. Once again, all D'Andrea made. And I know that by the print style, the celluloid type, and the shapes as well. But taking a look at the Gretsch, the oldest Gretsch we have here is another Slow Gin on Ice going back to the 1950s, 1960. Other varieties here were predominantly produced in the 1960s and to the mid-70s. So this shape here, the 348, which is actually a less common shape and more difficult to come by than the 351 here. And I'll bring them up for comparison so we can take a look at those shapes right there. You can see the 348 is a much larger shape. But an interesting note, even though this shape here, the 348's more difficult to come by, when it comes to Gretsch picks, it's actually the 346 in the 351 that is more difficult to come by. They seem to produce those picks, but in far fewer numbers than they did the 348. And they probably chose the 348 just to have some distinction between other picks that were being offered. But a really nice celluloid here. You could see all that predominant amber in there. And you'll notice the shade differences amongst these different celluloids here as well. Lighter tones, darker tones, much darker tones here. So Gretsch, really nice logo there. We call that the T-top logo because you could see the T stretching across the top of the name right there. So we're looking at it here in at least 1, 2, 3 shapes here. At least 3 shapes. And moving on over here to Arita, that's a Japanese brand, but these were produced in America, Japanese guitar brand. And all these, as I said earlier, are names of guitars or guitar companies that produced guitars bearing the name of the company, such as Gretsch. The Arita picks a number of different shapes here, but all these shapes are still produced today. You can still find these shapes. Here's the large triangle right here, known as the 355. And here we have the modern 347. You'll see the modern, or the older 347 was a much larger pick, but D'Andrea went through some name changes in the catalogs, and I won't get into that confusion right now, but basically there were 3 different types of 347, 347 and a half, and 347 and 3/4. Arita, nice stylized cursive name, basically the same on all the picks, and you could see some of them don't have gauge markings, such as these right here, but this is a thin, medium, and a heavy. And we have some Aritas in white as well. Moving down here to Sakova, another Japanese brand. Very difficult pick to come by. Only have 2 models, and once again, we have that nice stylized print. Ibanez, same thing. An exclusive font type for their pick as well, shown in thin, medium, and heavy. In this case, the person I bought them from informed me they acquired them in 1976, which is good information to have, because then maybe we could associate this color celluloid with other celluloids from that period. And I want to move over to the custom Kraft and Goya right now. A few interesting things going on. Let's start with the Goya. First of all, the name was selected for the 18th century famous Spanish painter Francisco Goya, and has a very unique logo, stylized logo, unlike any other logo. Goya was initially produced in Japan, but later in Italy, Sweden, and Korea, depending on who owned the company, as it was sold a number of times. And the custom Kraft brand down here was the house brand for St. Louis Music. Now, St. Louis Music also had a brand of picks called Vibratone, and we've seen some of them going back to the 1930s earlier, in some earlier videos with impressed picks. But here we have custom Kraft related to Vibratone, and we're going to also see some printed Vibratone picks coming up real soon. So Goya, very interesting font type. Custom Kraft, your basic block lettering. And these picks probably span the period of the late 1950s to the mid-70s based on the celluloid type. 2 different size triangles right here, both a 355 and a half and a 356. And what stands out again is this distinct celluloid right here. Take a look at it. Once again, we got that Coke on ice, sometimes referred to as whiskey on ice appearance. Very nice, very sweet. So there you have it for these particular 8 guitar brands. I chose them all together because they do span a relatively same period of time, 1950s to the mid-70s, on similar celluloids. And they are all guitar brands. So we'll be looking at a whole bunch more. Stay tuned to play more picks. Joe Macy at findpick7@yahoo.com. Feel free to rate a comment. Any comment. I don't care if it's negative. If it is, I'd like to hear about it. So take care for now. Feel free to rate with any questions you might have as well. Bye-bye.